What is up guys, the Strong Boys 19 here. So this is going to be a list video, and it has been a very long time since I had done one of these kinds of videos, and I used to do a video on the top 5 Death albums, and I decided to do that after I had completed their discography back when my reviewing style wasn't that great. But needless to say, this is going to be the entire discography ranking from least favourite to my favourite of Pink Floyd. Now, disclaimer, this is all on my opinion, and if you have your own list, drop it down in the comments below, and I'm looking forward to see the list or just comments in general. Here we go. Number 15, The Final Cut. Now, before some of you guys are going to be commenting negatively, this is not a bad album. I don't think it is like the nadir in Pink Floyd's discography. They've never made a bad album, but the reason why The Final Cut is the lowest of the low in this list, I just don't really have a strong connection with it. It does have some brilliant production, beautiful instrumentation, heartfelt performances from Roger Waters, but there were moments during the album that I find just a little bit tedious with some of the repetitive lyrical content, and that some of the tracks feel a bit flat and not as good as the other ones. There are some very good material on here, but it just doesn't really have a full momentum of a great release as good as the previous albums, in my own opinion. So that's why The Final Cut is at the bottom of the list. Number 14 is A Momentary Lapse of Reason. Despite that I had said the flaws about this album, most notably on the second half of this, I personally would say that this is a bit of a better album than The Final Cut. Their first album without Roger Waters since he left the band. But again, like The Final Cut, it does have merits of good on pretty much the same opinions. It's not like one of those albums that has like a big consistent vibe of enjoying the whole entire thing from start to finish, but it has some really good songs on here. It's not what I thought it would be like in terms of just the whole album in itself, but I do enjoy this album for a bit. Number 13 is More, Pink Floyd's first soundtrack, and this album is really enjoyable. There are some very nice instrumentals on this record, sweet folk sounds to some rocking tunes. I find the album just a little bit loose and not as properly structured. A really nice record, but it's just not strong enough. So there's not really much I could say about this album, but I did enjoy this one nonetheless. Number 12, the band's final album, The Endless River. The Endless River, as a tribute to Richard Wright, was a very good idea, and I do give Mason and Gilmour so much credit, and that they reused this material after it was shelved from the Division Bell era, and to make an album as a tribute to Richard Wright and also to Storm Thorgerson. It is a very nice final album. The album tries to build itself up into something big, but it just doesn't, and that is what's disappointing about this album. But don't get me wrong, some of the ambient sounds on here are really sweet and lovely to hear, and some improvisations, but really The Endless River still does not do justice as like one of the stronger albums in Floyd's discography. Number 11, A Saucerful of Secrets. Now, I know some Floyd fans would pick this higher, like in the top 10 or higher than that. As a follow-up to The Piper at the Gate of Dawn, I really think that this is another very good album to continue that phase of the psychedelic phase, like on Piper at the Gate of Dawn, their first album with David Gilmour, and I know that Jug Band Blues does have Syd Barrett on it, the last track on the album. A bit of moments on here that really feel a bit lackluster and just doesn't have like a proper definition of production and songwriting, but Saucerful of Secrets is a very good follow-up. Okay, Strong Boys 19's top 10 Pink Floyd albums. Number 10 is Omigawa. Now, Omigawa is one of the albums that many fans would pick this lower down in the list, but the reason why I think Omigawa is at number 10 is that this is like something very unusual that I give it a lot of respect for. But in terms of Omigawa as a studio album in itself, it would have been lowered down. While I find some of the compositions to be growers, like Sisyphus and the Grand Vizier's Garden Party, and still loving Grantchester Meadows and liking The Narrow Way a lot. First half wise on the live record saves it. I think it is a brilliant live album, and that really sets the mood of enjoying Omigawa a lot more. I like the live album a lot still than the studio album, but the studio album has been a better listening experience for me. So while it may be difficult and challenging for some people, I really do think that Omigawa is a very misunderstood attempt, despite that the band hated it themselves after its release. But Omigawa, I really liked it. Number 9 is Obscured by Clouds. Their final album as a soundtrack, the soundtrack to La Vallée, released in 1972. This is to me more of a focused soundtrack album, but when I listen to it, I don't think of it as a soundtrack, although that it is. I just think of it as like just another studio album by Pink Floyd. Production wise can be like a little bit weak in spots, but they have some really good gems on this, like Burning Bridges to Childhood's End. I really like some of the other ones, like The Goal Is In There, Absolutely Curtains to Stay. This is a really good album, and I think it is one of the very underrated ones that needs to have a lot more credit. So Obscured by Clouds is at number 9. Number 8 is Atom Heart Mother. Personally for me, their best underrated album, and I find that a lot of the material on this album, yes, can be unusual at first, but they turn out to be some really great material. If is beautiful, and Fat Old Son is brilliant, and Atom Heart Mother Suite, which is the whole first half of this album, is a masterpiece. Despite what I said on Alan's Psychedelic Breakfast, it still doesn't do justice as the other tracks though, but musically is very, very different. It's a lot diverse of experimentation with some weird moments to some improvisations, brass sections, but I think that Atom Heart Mother is a really, really good album in Pink Floyd's discography, and to me it is one of the albums that I think deserves a lot of the credit. Now, number 7, some of you guys may be really surprised to see this album in the list. Number 7 is The Wall. I know, it can be surprising for some Floyd fans, but this album, as a rock opera double album for what it was, it is a brilliant double album from start to finish, although I still would say that some of the material to be not as strong as the other tracks, and from what I thought of Another Brick in the Wall Part 2, but this has some of Pink Floyd's most striking and really big sounds of instrumentation, and the music is absolutely fantastic. Brilliant performances vocally from Gilmour and Waters. Amazing production. I personally wouldn't say that this is one of the greatest double albums of all time and as one of the classics of Pink Floyd, and that's one of the reasons why it's lowered down in the list. but I still really, really like this album so much. Number 6, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn, Pink Floyd's first album with Syd Barrett and the only Syd Barrett oriented album in terms of just Syd on the whole thing from start to finish. And this album is so damn brilliant. For a debut album to have music this wild yet fun and joyous to listen to, with poetry and such humorous style lyricism from Barrett's own imagination, it all blended together so well. A lot of their great tracks of Astronomy Domain, Lucifer Sam, Scarecrow, The Gnome, Bike, my favourite on this album, Interstellar Overdrive, this is a really strong debut album for Pink Floyd, and it is just one of their best albums. And this is like one of the albums that you need to check out if you want to get into the psychedelic era of 1960s music. So Piper at the Gates of Dawn, my 6th favourite Pink Floyd album. Number 5 is The Division Bell. I still really think that this is one of their strongest albums, and a lot of the tracks on here are fantastic and really great instrumentation that is beautiful, sometimes dark, but it's just the album that has a lot of mood and atmosphere. Some great songs on here like Poles Apart, What Do You Want From Me, and of course other songs like High Hopes, Take It Back, and one of my other favourites on here, Wearing the Inside Out. So The Division Bell was one of the first albums that I had heard from Pink Floyd, and this is, to me, one of their very underappreciated but strongest albums yet. Number 4 is Animals. An album that is still derided by so many people, but some Floyd fans would say that it is their best album, which I don't think it is, but it was almost close into the top 3, hence it is at number 4. Very aggressive lyrically, based on Animal Farm from George Orwell's novel at the time, to some really dark, intense music, and it is another really strong album that has so much power, from the vocal delivery to the performances themselves of the band playing music this deep. An album that's not for everybody, but it is, to me, one of their best albums. Number 3 is The Dark Side of the Moon. Now, this album used to be at number 2, but I have an album that I place higher than Dark Side of the Moon, although Dark Side of the Moon is one of my top 50 all-time favourite albums, but the album at number 2 is not in that list. But in terms of more of the favourites, this album at number 2, which I'm going to talk about, I prefer to listen to more than The Dark Side of the Moon, and I still love this album. There's really not much words to be said about this album, since The Dark Side of the Moon has been celebrated as one of the top greatest albums of all time, and that I just still don't see it as the best album ever. Highly intelligent, from the concepts, the themes on different topics, stellar production, and incredible music. What can be said about Dark Side of the Moon? Just the same things over and over and over again. So yeah, The Dark Side of the Moon is one of the best albums ever made, and that's pretty much all I have to say about it. So number 2, in terms of more of the favourite Pink Floyd album, like Dark Side of the Moon, but I prefer to listen to this album over it, number 2 is Medal. Medal, to me, is where Pink Floyd had finally found their sound, and that their songwriting was stronger and its production got better and better over time. This has one of their best tracks yet, including One of These Days, to the magnum opus Echoes, which takes the second half of the album. But it does have other incredible songs on here, like Fearless, the beautiful acoustic track A Pillow of Winds and Saint-Tropez. I do like Seamus a lot as well, but Medal as an album in itself is still, to me, one of the masterpieces of Pink Floyd's entire discography. So it's at number 2. And number 1, some of you may know this one is going to be at number 1. I could go on about it. It is Wish You Were Here. This is still, to me, one of my top all-time favorite albums, and that I really still think it is Pink Floyd at their greatest and at their finest. Their homage to Syd Barrett, it is beautiful, powerful, emotional. You know, the whole thing is just such a journey with some stellar music and sublime lyrics. It's just, to me, Pink Floyd's greatest work ever, and this will always go down in history, in my opinion, as the ultimate progressive rock album. As much as I love many others, but Wish You Were Here means so much to me musically, personally. It's just the best album Pink Floyd had ever done, without a doubt. So that is it, guys. Feel free to share your list in the comments below. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll keep you guys posted for more videos in the near future.